Hi, everybody. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our event. Come on in, get comfy. We're going to get started in a couple minutes.
Hi, Dad.
Hey, my mom's going to be here too. So this event is being recorded, so you will be able to access it later on, or if you have coworkers or teachers on your team who you want to catch up with what you've learned, you can send it to them. It will also be available on our website, redbudresourcegroup.org, for reference. Super excited to see some friendly faces, people that we've seen in our workshops before. Welcome back to our Zoom room. Now, I know that there are a lot of educators who are in their first week in PD who may have signed up and can't take it. If you haven't muted yourself yet, please mute yourself. All right, I'm going to get started, and I know that some people are going to join as we move forward. Again, this is totally recorded, so all of the people who signed up who couldn't make it today are going to get a copy of the recording. You can share it with your teaching teams, and it will be available for free on our website, redbudresourcegroup.org. So without further ado, we're going to get started. So welcome to Back to School Native Perspectives, Everyday Lessons. We have 90 minutes together. I know that that seems like a lot, but it is not enough. And so I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we are going to do in this short amount of time we have together. In a moment, we're going to do a warm up, and then I'm going to do a little segment that I call Native 101. If you've been in a Redbud workshop before, you will have heard parts of this before, but it's never a bad thing to hear it twice because it's really important information. We're going to give you a framework for incorporating Native voices into your classroom. It's called the 6 Ps of Native education. We're going to do a quick introduction into our new unit that we have called Native Perspectives, Everyday Lessons. We're going to do 2 mini lessons from the unit. So it's just going to give you a little sneak peek of the type of content that is in the unit. We'll look at some additional resources, Q&A, and then we'll move on, and we'll give you the opportunity to implement some of these new resources. So we're going to start with a Jamboard warm up. And if you taught through the pandemic, you might be familiar with Jamboard. If you are not familiar with it, it's a really great Google tool. So I put a link in the chat, and I'd love you all to click on it. And I'm going to actually back out of my slideshow for a second so that I can go to the Jamboard. It's in the chat. You can open it, put the link in again. And when you click on it, you're going to see this. If you don't want to click on that link and you don't know what's happening, you can just look at my screen. That's fine too, but this is going to be an interactive activity. So let's see. Anybody join the jam room yet? I want to wait to make sure it's actually working for people.
How gross my gum looks from my Halloween candy, and I've been enjoying it for a little bit.
Anyone able to open the link? Can you give me a thumbs up if you could open the link? Okay. Some people,
Yeah.
I think maybe there's just a lag on my screen. That's fine. So we're going to ask 3 questions. I see some people already know how to use Jamboard. That's great. So basically, I'm going to ask you a question. What do you know about Native American communities? And I want you to answer the question on Post-its. So the Post-its are right here on the side. You can see like there's a pen icon, eraser, select, and then sticky note. I guess not a Post-it, sticky note. And I'm going to have you write an answer and put it on the board. Now I want you to try to answer this like you're one of your students. Okay. We know that you might know some things, but what do you think your students are going to come into the classroom with? What's their prior knowledge going to be that they're bringing in with them? So let's take a moment. And if you don't know how to use this, you can write it in the chat and one of the hosts will add a sticky note for you.
Just a reminder, and make sure your mics are muted. Don't get any strange feedback.
So again, if you're just coming in, we're answering this question, what do you know about Native communities? But as if you are a student, as if you're one of your kids coming into the classroom. So I'm saying that people might say the kids might think they were here before us. They're the first peoples here. There aren't many of them left. Reservations, they used to be called Indians. Their Native Americans are still alive. They were hunter-gatherers, right? These are the kinds of things that kids might bring with them. Good. So I'm going to go to the next question now. And the way you do this, if you're not looking at my screen, is see it at the top where there's an arrow pointing right and it says next frame. You're going to click next frame so that you're on frame 2 out of 3. Someone jumped ahead. There's always a couple people who jump ahead. So where did you get your information? So now I want you to be a kid again and put in where you think your students are going to get their information from. And it's okay if it's repeating what other people say. That's actually important.
Wow, this is really interesting. I feel like I'm learning a lot.
So we're seeing lots of TV, movies, 4th grade teacher, because that's where you usually learn about Native American history, documentaries, school learning. You might learn from elders, older people in your family, TikTok, Wikipedia, textbooks. Okay. So the last one we're going to look at, I'm going to go to slide or frame 3 out of 3, is do you notice any patterns in our sources? Kind of go back, look at those sources. What are the patterns with where we think our students are going to get their information from? So definitely online is a big pattern. Lots of media sources. Yeah, no one knows any real Indians. There were a couple people, because I know there are some Native people in this room who said elders and cultural teachers in our communities, but most people in the United States don't actually think they know Native people. And so their references are not going to be from Native people. They're going to be from secondhand sources or from media sources. Those sources aren't very official looking. Very few, if any, were Native driven. And so I start, because I'm a middle school teacher, a previous middle school teacher, and I used to start all of my units with an activity like this to help me assess my students' prior knowledge, figure out what they know about the topic before they come into the classroom. But what I love about this final question is that it is a opportunity to start assessing source quality that can easily be adapted and accessible to all age levels and grade levels. So a lot of the lessons we're going to talk about today are geared towards the middle school, elementary school level, but you can have conversations about source quality, especially when it comes to natives with little kids. And a part of why this is so important for us is that Native people experience so many stereotypes, and most of those stereotypes are perpetuated by inaccurate information sources. And so in order for us to combat that, we need to reflect on where we're actually getting our information, right? Where our assumptions are coming from. So thanks for going through that little warm up with us. I'm going to do a quick introduction to who I am. So my name is Taylor Pennywell, and I am a member of Berry Creek Rancheria, Band of Maidu Indians of California in Butte County. And I'm also the executive director of Redbud Resource Group. And I'm a former middle school teacher. I have a master's in teaching, and I taught middle school for 7 years.
Amenahi, hinti katunapoy, Trelisa Kalatek. Good day, how are you? My name is Trelisa Barada. I'm an enrolled member of the Middletown Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians of California, and I'm the curriculum developer for Redbud Resource Group. I'm also a graduate student at Sonoma State University, hoping to receive my Master's of Education by the end of next spring. So throughout this workshop, you guys are going to hear Taylor and I talking a lot about stories of the places in which we live and teach. So Taylor and I just want to take a minute or two to share with you our stories and the places we come from. I was born in San Francisco and grew up primarily in Novato, California, in the traditional territory of the Coast Miwok, not too far away from the homelands of my ancestors, the Lake Miwok and Pomo people, as you can see on this map. We traditionally inhabited the land just south of what is now called Clear Lake. This next picture is of my great-grandparents, Henry and Martha Knight. And in this next picture, our ancestors relied heavily on the lake for food and travel. So in this picture, you see some of our members have built a traditional tule boat which is similar to what you would have seen generations ago on the lake. Middletown Rancheria is the only remaining Lake Miwok village. We also identify as Pomo because our culture was very similar to that of our Pomo neighbors, but we spoke a different language. We spoke Lake Miwok, and the name of our village in Lake Miwok is actually Kutsa, and our language is Kutsata. And that's my story in a nutshell.
Thanks, Trelisa. So the photo that you're looking at here is of my ancestral territory. I'm Time Maidu. And this is the mountains in the Sierra Nevada foothills in what is now Butte County. And the river that you see here is the Feather River. Now, if anyone teaches California history, 4th grade history, or just like a history buff, you might be familiar with this area because it was in the mother lode of the gold rush, but it was also the center of the state-sanctioned genocide that was leveraged against our people in 1851 through the 1860s. And so after gold was discovered, thousands of migrants from all over the world invaded our territory, desecrated our ecosystem, and also attempted to wipe us out. And so it is a miracle that me and Trelisa exist because we both come from families that were targeted by the California genocide. So the photo that you see here is of my great-grandmother, Cordelia Martin, and her sister, Lena Martin, with some of their baskets. See, they're really talented basket weavers. And it is also really amazing that these women were able to maintain relationships with their plant and animal relatives and their ecosystems to be able to create baskets, because these are the children of genocide survivors. They are not supposed to be there, and their baskets and their knowledge is not supposed to have survived, but it did. The photo that you see here is of my ancestral territory in 2021. It's the same forest that you see in that first picture. And this is because we've had massive forest fires in the state of California that are directly related to the fact that Native people have not been allowed to steward our lands and our waters for 170 years. Without Native people taking care of our land and applying our stewardship practices to our land, it is simply being destroyed. So when Trelisa and I talk to you about some of the science lessons that we have for you here today, we're bringing this legacy and this history with us into the conversation. So I'm going to jump into that Native 101 section. I'm going to talk really fast through this so that we have time to do the mini lessons, but this is super essential information. So this is a Native community profile of the United States. There is a term called Indian country that you see here. It's not a term we gave ourselves. It's a political and legal term given to us by the federal government. And it is a term that refers to all of the land that is under the ownership or jurisdiction of Native governments, communities, families, and it's just a general term that is often used in articles and research to refer to Native people and Native community. There are 573 and growing federally recognized tribes in the United States. To have federal recognition means that the federal government formally recognizes the legitimacy of a tribal nation's government and is therefore in a political relationship or diplomatic relationship with that tribal government. There are lots of tribes that don't have federal recognition, but might still be completely legitimate and have ancestral ties to their lands. It's just that the federal government doesn't want to recognize them. Tribes are sovereign, so it means that we can make our own decisions, make our own laws, levy taxes, we can have our own healthcare systems, our own education systems, and more. However, we're still subject to federal laws, and I like to reference we have about the similar amount of power as a state government. I'm going to zoom in on California because that's where I am at. California is super interesting because we have by far the most federally recognized tribes with 110 just in the state of California, and many state or county federally recognized tribes. And we have a ton of linguistic diversity as well, with over 90 Native languages spoken. And we have a very large urban Native population. Oakland is the largest Native population in the state of California. Now that was the Native 101. And if you've taken our courses before, you're going to be familiar with this. But if right now you're wondering, why didn't you know that Native 101 information? It is because there's a mechanism that is pervasive in the United States, and that is cultural erasure. So cultural erasure is when an entire people's history, culture, knowledge, and existence is ignored or left out of education, decision-making processes, and other situations within a community. And all of us in this room have experienced the cultural erasure of Native people because we are all related to the K through 12 education system. So currently in the United States, 27 states make no mention of a single Native person in their curriculum. And I'll tell you that we're actually going backwards in some places in the statistic because there are some states that are trying to remove Native people from the standards. And this doesn't get better in college, where 0.4% of college faculty are Native and less than 10% of Native American universities have Native studies programs. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because it is really, really likely that any American is going all the way through their education, getting a fancy degree, getting a fancy job, and being in a position of influence, and they don't even know Native people exist. They don't think they've ever met a Native person. And the thing is that your Native students feel this. 3 out of 4 Native students report feeling erased in their classrooms, and that is related to very high rates of suicide that we have in our community, which is 25% among our youth. So I'm going to show you some of the statistics that back this up, because you probably know if you're in a community where you don't feel wanted or seen, you're probably not going to be very motivated to try. So right now, Native people have the lowest graduation rates of any comparable group in the United States. This is slightly old data, but when you compare it to recent localized data, it hasn't changed. We also have very low college enrollment, only 19%, and only 41% of that 19 actually graduate and go on to be in positions of power. Now, this has nothing to do with Native students not being capable of learning. It, in part, has to do with the way that we talk about Native people in classrooms. So the state of Native education, what we have right now, it's super, super, super outdated. And there are many Native people and educators who are fighting to improve this. So we have in the state of California, still really outdated California mission education, where we glorify the forced conversion of Native people. We celebrate genocidal figures like Father Juniper Serra, who was the father of the mission system and responsible for tens of thousands of deaths. We, when we include Native people, we often look at Native people through like a primitivism or a fetishization of Native skill learning. So you learn to make a drum or you learn to make a teepee and that's it. We still have mascots that are very common. We have anthropological of Native people, and we usually only refer to us in the past tense. And if we do look at the true history of colonization, we are often, sorry, I gotta mute somebody, hyper-focused on the colonizer instead of celebrating the resistance of Native people and the fact that we survived a genocide. Now, we're not going to talk about this, but I do want you just to reflect, how do these examples promote stereotypes? I hope it's obvious. Now, the state of education, what we want. Well, we want books about Native people written by Native people. We want Native scientific knowledge. We're very, very skilled scientists. We want examples of Native resistance. How did we survive? You have to be pretty smart to be able to survive a genocide. Examples of contemporary Native movements. What are we doing today? Knowledge of contemporary Native political systems. It is in the Constitution that the federal government has a relationship with Native governments. And so why don't our democratic citizens know about this? Localized information and case studies. That means that you teach about tribes that are in your local area. And then lastly, collaboration with tribes and Native organizations. I'm going to ask the flip side of that previous question. Reflect on how these examples promote strengths. And you could probably imagine how this is going to change a Native student's perception of themselves and their community if they're getting to learn about this in school.
Awesome. Well said, Taylor. We're sure you guys are going to have some questions. So throughout the presentation, we're going to do our very best to leave time at the end to address your questions. So please write them down. And apologies again for speaking so fast. We're going to do a little bit more talking, so a little bit more listening on your part, but then we'll have some fun. I just want to take a moment to explain this next slide. So there's a plethora of Native scholars out there with similar priorities to Redbuds and are working relentlessly to improve Native education. I had the privilege of learning about the research of one of those scholars, Dr. Leilani Subzalian, and her work offers educators a framework for teaching Native content. And we refer to these orientations as the 6 Ps. So the first P orients curriculum in place. And we want you to acknowledge the local Native people and their traditional homelands of the place that you teach. Most of you have likely heard Rene Descartes' famous philosophy of self, I think, therefore I am. I like to think of a Native philosophy of self from the indigenous orientation of place as land is, therefore we are. So the second P orients Native Americans in the present day. As we discussed, for too long, dominant curriculum has described Native Americans as objects of the past. This is cultural erasure, as Taylor already noted, and this can make Native students feel invisible or erased from the worlds in which they live. It's important to talk about Native people in the present tense and to include modern Native knowledge in all school subjects. However brutal the history of California Indians is, our traditional knowledge has survived, and it's time to listen and to learn from this diverse amount of knowledge. Native people are systematically targeted by colonialism to this day, but we do have inherent sovereignty. The federal government's meant to protect that sovereignty. The third P aims to challenge power dynamics within curricula. Recognize colonial words and metaphors in curriculum like the land was free for the taking or it was a prize to be won. Avoid using language that depicts Native Americans as damaged or as victims of oppression, and instead highlight Native power and agency and resilience and strength and survivance in the face of atrocities, in the face of a state-sanctioned genocide, in the face of cultural erasure. So curricula tends to face west. That means from the perspective of European explorers looking to the west. We can shift our perspective instead to face east from the viewpoints of the indigenous. You can challenge Eurocentric narratives by simple rephrasing. For instance, instead of teaching about American expansion, call it for what it is, American invasion. By simply attending this event, you're already reorienting your perspective by hearing from California natives. Please amplify Native voices in your classrooms. P emphasizes political nationhood. If you're teaching about state and federal governments, you should also be teaching about tribal governments. What were the 18 unratified treaties in California, and why is it important to honor those treaties? Politics are a difficult subject to teach, especially to younger students, but you can expose your students to current event stories related to tribal nations and their rights and political status. And the final P stands for partnerships. This is a huge part of Redbud's mission, and we need allies. Cultivate and sustain partnerships with tribes and Native organizations. This means building actual relationships with Native people. It means working as a team, understanding the importance of tribal consultation. It means continuing to attend events like these to stay informed on Native concerns with schooling and respectful representation. I know that was a quick overview of the 6 Ps, but having a basic understanding, you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Taylor, of these critical orientations is going to put you in a significantly more respectful position to teach Native content in your classrooms. So introducing our new unit, Native Perspectives Everyday Lessons. This unit introduces students to multiple subjects from a California Indian perspective, and it can be adapted from the perspective of the local Indigenous place that you teach. There's a more pan-Indian culture and movement in the US, and it's okay to talk about that with your students, but always differentiate pan-Indian culture with local tribal cultures, because we are as diverse as we would like to see our ecosystems, and we celebrate our diversity. And so we start by asking one simple essential question: how do we show respect and reciprocity to the land and to local Native communities? And each lesson comes back to this question. And I'm not going to go over the details of the unit in its entirety, because we really want to give you guys some hands-on time to interact with the curriculum. So let's jump in.
And I'll just add before we move on that I put in the chat a PDF of the 6 Ps for California Native education, and it was created by Native youth through California Museum and Cultural Center here in Sonoma County. And we will also be releasing the lessons in this unit over the course of the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. All right, so our first lesson is titled Understanding Where We Live, and it gives students a better chance to familiarize themselves with the local geographic features of the place they live and go to school. But why is it important to Native geography? Why is it important to start with Native geography? This is an important question to ask before giving this lesson. As we said earlier, our ancestral stories and traditions are tied to place. So Indigenous curriculum always starts with understanding Indigenous places. These places pre-exist colonial boundaries. There's a big push to incorporate Indigenous knowledge into the sciences, but how can you do that while operating within geographical understandings? We have to be able to incorporate both understandings of geography in order to highlight the impact of our changing relationship to place. So we pulled a few quotes from some well-known Native authors to drive this idea home. And this is a quote from the chairman of the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria and author of the young adult book, How a Mountain Was Made, Greg Saris. And Taylor is going to read this quote for us and then go ahead and drop in the chat. What do you learn about Indigenous values from this quote?
Cool, okay. I'm thinking of so many things after hearing about how Coyote created people, said Question Woman. And I'm confused. Are you and I people, or are we crows? We're all people still, answered Answer Woman. Some of us took the form of animals, some of us the form of human beings. But the point is, we're all relatives. We're all related. We have eyes and ears. We all talk. We all have stories. So if you could please put in the chat, what do you learn about Indigenous values from this quote?
We're all connected. Yes, connection is important. All life is valuable. Absolutely. We consider our relatives all living things and non-living things.
Oh, I love Sabrina as the Answer Woman and Question Woman are equals.
Oh, very good. And opposites. Equals and opposites, they balance each other out. Thank you.
All species are
Community.
interconnected.
Respect, that's a big one.
And also that we picked this book to highlight because it tells concrete stories about very specific geographic places, in this case Pomo and Coast Miwok territory, but it's also grade appropriate for if you want to read it out loud to your kids for elementary. But I also think that middle school and definitely high school kids can read it. It's taught in college, and there are also play versions of some of the stories in this book.
Oh yes, great contributions. Our next quote is taken from author and illustrator Michaela Goad's new book, Berry Song. What can you tell us about this quote? What values can you pull from this quote? Go ahead, Taylor.
Grandma tells me we're a part of the land, as the land is a part of us, they say. The ocean sings to us, rolling ashore like a beating drum. We sing too, so the tides know we are home. So again, what do you learn?
Yes, dignity, that's a good one. A Spanish version of How a Mountain Was Made. I have not seen one.
So we are all interconnected. Reciprocity with the natural world, reverence for the ocean.
Love that word.
The land knows us and we know the land. They're in a relationship with the ocean, right? Mm-hmm. So they're singing to it so the ocean knows its home because it's like a relative. Grandma and elders as cultural bearers. Mm-hmm. Great. This is a beautiful book also for young ones, but I love teaching children's books even to teenagers and adults. Think that it's a really nice and concise way to teach about these themes and these values.
Absolutely. And there's a really cool little trailer for this book. You can search it up on YouTube. Great. And our last quote is taken from Robin Wall Kimmerer's widely circulated book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And in fact, a new version has just been released for young adults. So check that out. Go ahead and drop in the chat. What do you learn about Indigenous values from this quote?
So it says, when Sky Woman arrived here, she did not come alone. She was pregnant. Knowing her grandchildren would inherit the world she left behind, she did not work for flourishing in her time only. So what do we learn about Indigenous values? Care for future generations.
Good, forward thinking.
Honoring the ancestors and future generations is a way of life.
Being a good ancestor, I love it. Mm-hmm.
I like your decisions have consequences for generations beyond yourself. Yeah. I'm really excited that there is a young adult version of this book. The adult version is beautiful. And I think that this is a no-brainer resource for integrating Native American values and lessons into your science classroom, because this is a book that actually, I mean, it could be an ELA, but I really think that it could live in science and help students see the multidisciplinary nature of science studies.
Absolutely. And if you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass, it is a must read. All right, so Taylor's going to go ahead and drop a PDF of our first lesson, lesson 1, into the chat. We won't have time to look over the entire thing, but we do want to focus on the activity portions of the lesson. So once she gets that in there, okay, great. Go ahead, open it up, scroll down to the explore section. And you'll see that the first activity starts off by asking students to compare 2 different types of maps. The first is a political map of the Bay Area. And you can see it on our screen. So go ahead, take a moment to observe this map, and then put yourself in your students' shoes. What do you think they would notice? Go ahead and drop some ideas into the chat. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Estrella. Estrella? Estrella or Estrella?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's awesome. Pre-order. Get it on your list. So yeah, what do you think your students are going to say when you show them this map? What are they going to notice about it?
What do you notice? What do you wonder?
There's Spanish words on the map.
Oh, yes. Lots of Spanish names of places. Reason for that is hopefully obvious.
English.
Spanish is crowded. A lot going on in this map, isn't there? What about what do you wonder? What do you think your students will wonder about this map? Who found each place? Who decided the names of the places? Great. Yep. Lots of different colors.
Concentrations on waterways.
There is a lot. Yeah, the waterways are pretty defined in this map. How has it changed over time? That's a good observation, a good wondering. Great. All right. Let's look at our next map. This is a map of the native peoples and languages of the Greater Bay Area. Same thing. Now, what do you notice? What do you wonder?
I know it's tiny.
It's a little small. Lots of different languages. Yep. Where did they all go? It's great wondering. Maybe what I kind of wonder is what is missing from this map? What's not included? Can we lay this map over the last map? We are going to compare the two.
So I love that Sienna pointed out that they recognize some names on this map that still exist on the other map. A really good one is this town Petaluma. Some people in here might have thought that it was a Spanish name. It is not a Spanish name.
And I like Gregory's question. Why don't we know many of these names, boundaries, and distinctions? And this is the place that most of us live, right? And we don't recognize a lot of these names, right? Awesome. Okay. So now we're going to compare the two. And I would like to hear from you. So if you raise your hand, and if you're willing to contribute, just go ahead, raise your hand, and we will call on you. How do these two maps compare? What are some similarities and differences? And just out of curiosity, what might you ask your students to elicit responses if you do teach in the classroom? Yes, the trails are not mapped. That's important.
Nicole, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. I would ask my students why they think the names changed.
Great.
As a vehicle for having that conversation about what has happened.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Mindset. Thanks, Nicole.
Anyone else want to share ideas that they have for what they might ask their students here? I know that I find it interesting to put a map of towns and cities and highways next to a town of indigenous languages, because they're not perfect matches, right, in content. But it makes me wonder, what is like, do people still speak these languages? As far as I know, in this area, we have, maybe 5 primary languages spoken. And yet when I look at the map on the right, there's 100. And so how is it that we reduced that many languages to just a handful of primary languages?
Yes. How did the languages all of a sudden change from indigenous to Spanish? For younger students, they might not know that history. And you can also just start out by asking your students simple questions like, what's the biggest city closest to us? Or can you see where you're from? Can you locate your place?
I think there's so many questions that come up too about what are the stories and experiences of this place. How does a place like Petaluma become what it is, right? It's on both maps. Or a place like Mayakama, what was it like hundreds of years ago or even 100 years ago when the primary language was WAPO to what it is now.
Right, right. And Gabriel brings up a great point. Where are the Ohlone on this language map, right?
They are integrated. Ohlone is actually not a tribe. It's kind of a general name for the tribes that are living in this Bay Area region. And so
language group, right?
It's a great question though, because it gets into the nuance of what actually makes a tribe, and what we call a tribe today might be slightly different than the ancestral definition of tribe. So the everything that looks like it's in the like San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area is Ohlone today.
Yeah,
We call it Ohlone.
a great wondering, Greg, too. How strict are the borders of the map? And we'll touch on that in this next portion. Touch on both those points in this next portion. So we're going to do just a little bit more map analysis, but using a different tool. Some of you may have heard of it. It should be able to tell you whose tribal homelands you teach in. So we're going to ask everyone navigate to nativeland.ca. Go ahead, read the disclaimer real quick because it is important, and then put in your zip code. You can put in the zip code of the place you teach. And then once you've done that, drop into the chat whose land you're located on so that we can see where you guys are coming from. And then once you've done that, just take a couple minutes to play with the toggles, and we'll see what other information you can find on your local region.
Now, some of you in this room might be familiar with native-land.ca. It is a pretty popular resource for helping students shift their paradigm, just geographically, how they relate to their place. You'll see when you open it, at least on my screen, that it opens to Africa. And so this website resource is about mapping indigenous territories all over the world, not just in North America. What is so amazing about that is it gives you the opportunity to integrate indigenous people into all of your lessons. So I used to teach medieval Europe when I taught 7th grade. This map shows that there are indigenous groups in Europe. And so I'm able to bring in that indigenized perspective, even when I'm talking about something that we don't normally associate with indigenous people. So I love that. I will say that the map is limited. It's crowdsourced information. And so it depends on tribes reaching forward and saying, this is my tribal territory, so they can add it. So not all of the detail is in there. There might be stuff missing, but it still is really useful for shifting the paradigm for students. And I will say I've used this in the classroom. Kids love it.
This is great. As you're looking around, also keep in mind, consider how this activity might change your students' perspectives on where they live too. And I will just say this website has a great teacher's guide in the resources section, and it has a ton more information on how to better use native land, and you can download it right off their website. We're also going to include it in our resource packet that we'll give you at the end of the training.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Fantastic. We got people all over the place. So there's something really important missing from all 3 of these maps, and that's the stories. Where are the stories of these places? And that brings us to our next activity. So now that you're oriented in the place that you teach, we're going to continue doing a little more research about those places with the Google Maps scavenger hunt, which Taylor just dropped in the chat. And we think your students are going to really enjoy doing this activity. The idea is it is designed for younger students. So if you teach older students, you might want to adapt it to make it a little bit more complicated. But the idea is to get students to think about their stories and their connection to the places that they live and learn. So for the sake of time, we're gonna locate one natural feature of your choosing, your city government's office, and the closest tribal office. And then we'll come back together in about 4-ish minutes, 4 minutes or so, and we'll debrief. So the instructions for this activity should be on the PDF. Let us know if you have any questions. We'll give you some time to work with it.
Again, if you're, this is geared towards little ones, like 4th grade. If you're teaching a, middle school or high school, you might want to think about how you can adapt this.
Also, if you have any feedback as teachers, please share with us. Can always adapt the activities and the lesson plans.
Oopsies. Go back. Oh, yes, sorry, Jessica, I will resend the PDF. It's literally just finding examples of these things though in your area that you live. So let's see.
Love it. Thank you, Greg.
Now, the purpose of doing something like this, there's lots of purposes, but thinking back to respect and reciprocity, right, for Indigenous ecosystems and Indigenous people, this is a little warm-up activity to get students oriented so that they can start to do that. So you can't show respect to Indigenous ecosystems if you don't know what ecosystem you live in, right? So getting students familiarized with their waterways, with the hills and mountains around them, makes it easier for you then to pair stories with those places, to pair field trips with those places, to bring Native people in to talk about these places, right? You simply can't do it with fidelity unless your students have an orientation for the place that they live. Another reason that we've included what we've included here, particularly the city hall and the tribal office, is to get at that one of those 6 Ps, the power and political nationhood. So we want to remind everybody in the United States that Native people are political entities, that we have political sovereignty in the United States. And I hope that what many of you are finding as you look up tribal offices on Google Maps, that there are tribal offices in your area that you didn't know about. There are governments that exist and are running and offering programs to their citizens in the place where you live. And so we want to expand students' perception of the place they live, not just from that ecology perspective, but also from the political perspective. And I do recommend just Googling, like in your Google Maps or whatever, tribal offices, and they should pop up.
And if they don't, why not?
Right, you might live in a place where for some reason there aren't Native people, and that is a whole nother, or no, not Native governments, I should say. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole for you to go down.
Can ask questions without finding the answers right away, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
I'm just going to give you guys
Paul
more seconds.
Paul keeps looking for the ocean, and he's in Oakland, but it keeps making him go to New Jersey.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Why do I still rely on people?
I think we could probably open the floor. I'm curious if this is bringing up any ideas for you, or if you were surprised by anything, like Paul's surprised that he lives in New Jersey. He didn't even know. But if there's any other, thoughts or questions that are coming up through this.
Yeah.
You can feel free to raise your hand.
Yeah, you can talk. Yeah. That's right, Sabrina. Google.
The map maker has an agenda while making the map. And someone's saying that the Gabrielino Tongva Tribal Council is close to the school they work at, and they didn't know. It's right there.
Right.
I know something that comes up for me is because someone said like with the previous map comparison, could we layer them on top of each other? It would be interesting to mark these places on the ancestral map, the language map.
Yeah.
I also think it's funny, like with the Tongva example, you know, if you're living in a big city like Los Angeles, a place that's like an urban center, the kids might not be thinking that there's going to be a tribal office in the middle of a city. And
Right.
that's also an opportunity to talk about assumptions that we have, right? That Native people live only in rural places or only in reservations, but not in urban centers.
Totally.
I don't know how many adults we work with in cities that say we would love to work with Native people, but there aren't any here. And they're living in a place where there's a massive urban Indian population. They just don't know where they are.
Oh, wow.
Because, you know, interesting.
Interesting. You want to answer Nicole's question, Taylor?
Do you do this thing with Girl Scouts? We don't actually do a lot of outreach with children themselves, but we can talk. We can give you some materials or connections in your area. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. That was fun. Let's move forward. So we hope that kind of has given you a better understanding of the places you teach. But I will say it is still a very basic understanding of place from a Native perspective, and kind of how Taylor already touched on. In fact, it's really more of an introduction to lesson 5 on ecosystem interconnectedness. And for tribes, place means so much more than the physical location of important sites to our communities. It's a much deeper understanding of how we interact with our land and its natural resources. And as Greg Saris put it, all things connect with one another, and each thing has a story. Our ecosystems provide us with our stories, and our stories are our theories. They are the original instructions, and they contain important ecological information. So this lesson looks closely at a local ecosystem from a Pomo perspective, the oak woodlands ecosystem, which is an ecosystem many California Indian tribes and keystone species depends on. And as we hope you'll see, it depends on us too.
And I just want to say before we jump into this, I hope that it's obvious. You really can't teach or indigenize your mind or your lessons or your classrooms just sitting at a computer and doing worksheets. That's not how it works, right? And so we recognize that these are really limiting in terms of what you can actually do, but we hope that they provide you just some really simple activities. But the idea is that you're going to take the things that you're learning and apply them outside. Because you really got to get outside to understand your ecosystem. I also just want to add before we move forward that most places, or many places in the United States, have oak trees. So oak woodlands, this concept works in other places besides California, but you also can adapt these ideas and activities to different ecosystems.
Absolutely. So I want you to think about how your students might answer these 2 questions. The first one's kind of an easy one. How do humans rely on our ecosystems? Just quickly throw some ideas in the chat so we can see what your thought processes are. Food, shelter, weather, yeah. Air, yep. Shade, shelter, yeah. Pretty straightforward animals for different things. Awesome. Fun and exercise.
Energy systems, yeah.
Yeah, this is a pretty easy question to answer, and it should be pretty easy for your students. The second question is a little bit tougher. How do our ecosystems rely on us? And if you don't think your students will be able to answer this question, go ahead and think about it in your own minds. But if they can't answer it as easily, or if you can't answer it as easily, just acknowledge that, because we don't talk enough about our role in nature. And yeah, if we're careless, the environment suffers. It's true. For respect, distribution, seed distribution, good. Ritual and prayer, yep. Nature needs to hear us.
It's why the grandma and her granddaughter sing to the ocean.
And they need love. Nature needs love, and that's what we provide. Fire management, yes. Don't want to leave our trash lying around. So as natives, we take our stewardship of our land very seriously. And we've always known that the land needs us as we rely on the land. So we're going to do two things in this mini lesson. I'm sorry for moving along so quickly. In the first activity, we'll be looking at a set of oak woodland species cards that we designed for this lesson. And we'll follow this activity up with a group discussion about the cards. And then we'll give you a chance to ask questions or give any feedback you might have. And then we want to end the session by talking, not the session, but this little mini lesson, talking a little bit about land acknowledgements. And we want to make sure that you leave with the knowledge you need to guide your students in the creation of their own land acknowledgements. So Taylor's going to drop two more things in the chat, a copy of the species cards and a copy of lesson 5. We're going to take 7 minutes or so to familiarize yourself with the cards and then do your best to make a list of the species from each of these categories. You might not finish, that's totally fine. We'll meet back here in 7 minutes or so. Go ahead and open those PDFs and just have a look-see, and then we'll come back.
as you look through this, I'm just going to talk a little bit about these cards and how they came to be. So these cards were created in partnership with the California Museum and Cultural Center, Indian Museum and Cultural Center here in Sonoma County, which is largely POMO run. And a couple years ago, we did a middle school and high school level ecology unit with them that is up on our website called Healthy Ecosystems, Feed Healthy Communities. And it's all about looking at the oak woodland ecosystem from an Indigenous perspective. So we worked with a native scientist in EPA. Her name is Mio Marufo, who's really well respected in this area. And she helped us get all of the information and pick the species that had a really strong relationship with one another in the oak woodlands ecosystem, but also species that are really culturally significant to the local Pomo tribes. And so these were created with a Pomo scientist. They are also species that have relationships to water. It's not totally clear, but that is something that is missing from this, is that we don't have the waterways integrated. So you might want to think about how you could integrate water into this as well. A way to make this really interesting, and it is in the older kids version of this on our website, is to integrate the let kids hear the native words for these species. I wouldn't necessarily recommend making them memorize the words or anything like that. It might not always be appropriate for the audience, but giving them the opportunity to hear the words can again help orient kids in that place that there is an original word for this thing that you're so familiar with. Well, as we wrap up the last minute and a half, does anyone have any questions about these or observations? We're going to move on to a kind of a group discussion in a second. I also know that there are some native community representatives here, and we would love to help you make these for your tribal community, so that every tribal community can have their own cards that they make by themselves. So if that's something you're interested in, reach out to us and we can give you a template. So Estrella is saying that I love that humans are included, emphasizing that we are part of the ecosystem. Exactly.
That's the whole idea.
Yeah. Also the reason we start with a basket is because so much of Native identity exists around baskets. Native life, we have baskets for everything, for gathering, for cooking, for holding water, for holding babies. And we cannot have baskets. We can't have the materials to make baskets unless we're in good relationship with all the things in our ecosystem that we need to make a basket. So we started with baskets for that reason. Baskets also tell our story of our land in the patterns.
Yeah.
So on that note, we're going to move forward, and this is going to be a little conversation piece here. So I want to kind of wrap this up and really make sure the point is there. So I have a picture of all of the little species that were included here, and I want to just have a conversation about the following questions. So the first question, and you can write in the chat as well, is which communities would be impacted by the disappearance of oak trees? Which communities would be impacted by the disappearance of oak trees? Just one day we wake up and there's no oak trees. You can write in the chat or speak out loud if you want.
Love to hear your voices.
Oh yeah, someone discovered the Northern Pomo online talking dictionary that we included, so you could hear Pomo words for these species. So what would happen if all the oak trees disappeared? Someone's saying that all of the species would be either directly or indirectly impacted over time. I know that humans, native Californians, rely on acorns. It's one of our staple foods. And so not having oak trees would cause a big issue for us for food. Squirrels also rely on acorns, obviously. Deers eat acorns. Some of these animals might rely on oak trees for shelter. So we're able to help students understand there's an interrelationship between these things. If you take one out, other things are going to be imbalanced. Next question is, which communities would be impacted by the disappearance of deer? Okay, saying all of us, I'm going to push you to actually try to be specific because of course. But let's think specifically, how would things be impacted? Deer eat the grasses. So there might be too many, certain grasses might be overgrown. Humans rely on deer for food. Native people rely on deer for food.
And I know you guys didn't get much time with the species cards, but they are a wealth of information that should answer these questions.
I love what Lori just pointed out about the white deerskin dance. So certain communities might rely on deer for ceremonial or regalia purposes. And so if you don't have deer, then there's a cultural piece, right? There's a cultural impact. I know deer really like to eat back the manzanita bushes. And it's really important that manzanita bushes are cut back in California because they are a matchstick. So when they are allowed to overgrow, when there's a fire, they just light up.
They're grazers.
Yeah. All right, next one. Which communities would be impacted by the disappearance of humans? This is a really important one.
I'd love to hear Lori teach this lesson.
I know, right? So what do we think might happen if the humans disappeared? Red clover would overgrow the deer question, sure. So things would start to overgrow if the deers were not, or if the humans were not keeping populations in control, in balance. Anything else? Mushrooms and butterflies would lose some of their food.
Nice.
There'd be more grazing by the deer because the deer would have more food. I also think that the squirrels would be happy because they wouldn't have to compete with us for acorns. So you have a bunch of fat squirrels. Happy squirrels.
A lot of overgrowth, right? A lot of overgrowth. And overgrowth affects a lot more than what we might think. It affects our waterways. And like Taylor said, it affects fire, wildfires.
And so doing an activity like this, and in the actual lesson, there's activities about making food webs and food chains so that students start to see the relationship from the scientific perspective. But you can also see, and I love that Lori's focused so much on the cultural impact, that the impact goes far beyond just whether or not you have food, right? It goes into how you live your life, what your story is, what your relationship to your land changes when different parts of your ecosystem disappear, or if they proliferate, or if they're reduced in size and not available in the same amount. And so we're all living in an ecosystem, and there's little levers that we're pulling. And when you put humans into the food web, you start to see that we play a very big part in making sure that those levers are in balance. And there are ways that Native people do this. And someone said it is, in like the Western term is traditional ecological knowledge, right? There's a body of knowledge that that is still in practice to make sure that we're maintaining this balance.
And I want to come back to what Lori contributed in a couple questions. So remind me if I forget.
Cool. Yes. So how are we all related? How are we all related?
We can even tackle Lori's comment in this question. We all need water. Water connects us all.
We all use energy. And in fact, when you look at healthy ecosystems, if you look at this lesson in that unit, it's all about energy transfer between these species. So absolutely, even these species are energy to each other,
We
right?
are energy. We use energy and we are energy.
Yeah. We're all living here together. We're all in relationship with one another. We're all relatives to one another.
And this is related to what Lori said about places are not wilderness. Places are our stories, and we are connected to these places. We are a part of these places, and thus to leave an area untouched is not the native way.
And in the lessons, in the other lessons, because remember, we went through lesson 1 and then we skipped forward to lesson 5. In the lessons in between those, you start to see examples of how Native people apply their knowledge to the land, and also why having the relationship to species like this are important to culture. And so there's lots of ways to integrate Native voices and their firsthand perspectives to kind of fill in these gaps for your students. And like I said, those will be posted and free on our website within the next 10 days. I think we're going to post them over time. So the last question then is, how can we show respect and reciprocity for our relatives?
Big question.
By the time your students get to this part of the unit, they're going to be ready to answer this, because they will understand the relationship. They will have heard from a bunch of different Native communities about how they show reciprocity and respect. And this feeds perfectly into the final project, which is going to get kids to go outside and to start rebuilding a relationship that is reciprocal with their ecosystems. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. And I'm going to do a really quick overview of some stories that you can also attach to a science lesson like this to further cement the idea that we are living in a storied place. We're living in a storied ecosystem. So every single one of those species has their own story attached to them that is passed down in the indigenous communities of the ecosystems where they exist. And so we already mentioned berry song, but a quick overview: it is a story of a grandmother taking her granddaughter out to harvest berries in every season of the year. And every season, it's a different berry that they're in a relationship with. And it shows their ceremony that they do, how they make sure that they're in good relationship, but also how they use the berries to show care to their communities by making jam and making pies and all of that. And so it's a really great way to talk about reciprocity and relationship. And it all comes from that ecosystem that we're living inside of, that we're a part of. The second one is We Are Water Protectors. And this is about a young Native girl in the plains who is advocating for clean water in her community by protesting a pipeline, an oil pipeline that is being put through her reservation land. And so this is an opportunity to highlight for students their relationship with their water and how their water gives back to them. And so they have a responsibility for looking out for that water. And then the last one, I love this book. It's so simple, but so impactful. It's called Encounter. And it's the story of a European explorer who arrives on the East Coast and meets a young Native boy, and they become friends. They have a day where the Native boy takes him around his territory. They go swimming, they share a meal together, they share stories and songs. And then at the end of the day, the European explorer goes home. He just goes home, says, thank you for being a good host. I hope I was a good guest. And he leaves. And it's so simple, but it is such a good opportunity to have a conversation about what could this relationship look like between settlers and indigenous people? What could it look like? And it's also important to remind students, if you choose to teach that European people, particularly the Nordic communities up in Scandinavia, had a economic relationship with Native American people on the East Coast before colonization. And so it is possible to have relationships with people who don't come from the same place as you without colonizing their land. So I really recommend that book.
And we're obviously not fans of Michaela Gold. Michaela Gold
She's really good.
illustrated all 3 of these books.
Yeah.
Love her artwork.
So there's 2 more slides, then we're going to go into Q&A and give you some more resources. We wanted to remind you of what the final project is here. So your kids, if you were to do this unit, would start with geography. Where do I live? I live in an indigenous place. What does this mean? Right, from multiple angles. And then they would get all kinds of firsthand experiences, hearing from Native people about their relationship to their land, how they show respect and reciprocity to their communities and their ecosystems. That your students would then get to play with those ecosystem cards to see the scientific backing behind all of that indigenous knowledge. And then they end with this, which is going outside, going to their favorite place and building a relationship. So the final project pushes them to get out of the classroom and to really apply what they're learning to their indigenous ecosystems. And it ends with a land acknowledgement. Now, maybe some people in here have attended our Going Beyond Land Acknowledgements class and know that we don't really believe that the work ends with a land acknowledgement, but we still think it is valuable to have students go through the process of writing a land acknowledgement that is rooted in authentic knowledge of where they live and also rooted in their values. This is a great age-appropriate way to teach a land acknowledgement. What is your relationship to this place? What do you want to say to the indigenous ecosystem and indigenous people of the place that you live? Why is this rooted in your values? How do you want to show respect and reciprocity? Make it really personal. So we are putting a link into this template for a land acknowledgement. And I'll tell you, I've had a lot of teacher friends do this with their students and it's been really awesome. So they'll go in and after doing a Native Studies unit or halfway through the year, once they've integrated Native voices into the classroom, every student will write their own land acknowledgement rooted in their own perspectives and values. And then they'll share their land acknowledgements with each other, talk about what they like about them, what they don't like about them, what they like to add, and then write a collective land acknowledgement that can then go up on the wall and be reviewed. And I think it's a great idea to review your class land acknowledgement periodically, because ideally it will change over time, right? As you learn and as your perspective grows and changes and adapts, you might choose to add things to the acknowledgement.
And I would like to just point out at the very end that it kind of includes a promise of sorts, a call to action, because with listening and learning comes responsibilities. And the question is, what are you going to do with the information that you've learned? And that's kind of the whole idea around the land acknowledgement, is you do the research, you learn, but then you make a change and you follow through.
Great. So on that note, we are going to open the floor for Q&A or for comments. If you have ideas for how you want to adapt something like this too, please share. Like I said, we just showed you a little snippet of a couple parts of some lessons, but all of these are aligned with Common Core standards, with state history standards, and some NGSS standards as well. So these are all ready for the classroom. And they're a little bit more complicated than what we showed you here. So we're excited for you to check them all out and let us know how it goes. But for now, we can, open the floor. So you'd like to raise your hand, we'd love to hear from you.
And if you decide to log off, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. And I am going to put right now a list of resources that we've collected for you too. Wait, I don't think I have it, Shirley. So can you add it?
Oh, the resources? Yeah.
And it's a big list of books, of essays, of other units and curricula that exist from other organizations that are doing good work. And so we want you just to have a nice reference. How often do you offer this training? This is the first time we've done this.
And we need to do more, is what we're hearing. And would love to do more.
Yes, this is actually Trilisa's first training with Redbud.
Yay. Pop my cherry. Is that the right one? I think it is.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi. Sorry that you can't see me, but anyway, my name is Gabriel, and my question is about the Redbud study group, and that seems to be focused in the California area, but is there any other areas that are also incorporated as well?
That's a great question. So because we're all, so the people who make up our staff are all California native. So we try to be really careful about speaking for our communities because we don't want to speak for other communities. So most of our resources right now are geared towards California. But these are adaptable to other regions. For example, like the geography thing, you can easily look up maps in your region and create something like that. The only thing that is not going to be adaptable is the firsthand experience about the place that we live, that we've integrated into the units. But if you go on YouTube and you do a little bit of digging, you might be able to find comparable resources. This is one of the trickiest things about Native education, is that to do it right and to do it ethically, every single tribe needs to have their own curriculum, because every single tribe has their own perspective. And so that makes it very, very tricky for us to offer curriculum from other tribal perspectives, because we would be co-opting someone else's story.
Totally. And if you've opened the
Right,
resources PDF, you'll see that there's
What
a
about
bunch of other curricula in there. Hopefully some of them are from your local area.
and can I ask about maybe doing a partnership and developing those curriculums with other areas, other Native peoples?
Are you asking Redbud to do it? Sorry, I was a little
Like for science, I'm thinking for specifically the STEM subjects, to get the Indigenous people perspective.
So
Because
okay,
the Mayans actually, they bring some knowledge into the STEM education as well.
So we are able to do partnerships to develop curriculum, but we require tribal council approval and invitation from the tribal community or nation of the place that we're creating curriculum for. This is just to make sure that everything's done ethically, or if you're partnered with a museum or, some kind of major institution that's going to have the permission.
Gabriel, which territory do you teach in?
I think they're on a phone.
Well, I was teaching at a university in DC, but right now I am in Austin, Texas. I believe the people here are the Umano and Ocoatlan. There's several different tribes here, but I haven't developed the curriculum specifically on working on that right now.
Right. Texas,
And also, I want to say as well that I am a member of the Deaf Indigenous organization that is called Turtle Island and it's a hand talk, and this organization is also focused on the deaf Indigenous language. It's not specifically a tribe, but we're just trying to we're trying to be recognized by the tribal government right now.
Oh, that's great. Are you familiar with the Smithsonian's Native Knowledge 360 resources?
That's what I would recommend.
I am, yes.
Yes, I would recommend that. And I would also just say that, you can teach lessons about Native people in territories outside of where you teach, but you just want to be explicit with your students that we are zooming in on a community that is not our local Native community. So that's totally fine. You just want to be really explicit about that.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
A couple questions here. Lisa asks why the native people where she lives, why are they called Pomo? And so Lisa had mentioned that she is in Middletown, right, Lisa?
Oh, well,
And
then
that is where my people are from. And the reason that we call ourselves Pomo, my great grandpa was Pomo. This is what we think, but it's a more complicated question than you would think, right? And my great grandma was like Miwok, and so we were so close. Like we were essentially neighbors. We were neighboring tribes, and the Lake Miwok and Pomo are anthropological names for our language group. So it's not the names of our villages. Like I mentioned, our village name was Kutsa. But in Middletown, at least in the Middletown Ranch area, we identify as Pomo because our culture was very similar to our neighboring Pomo tribes.
I'll also add that I don't know if this applies to Middletown, but it does apply to many tribes, that when the federal government went in and made tribes, because we didn't traditionally live in the kind of formations that the federal government placed us into here. The federal government came in a certain year and was like, okay, tell me who's in your tribe. And they wrote out a constitution, and that was your tribe. And they gave you a name. And so sometimes you were piled into a tribal group that might have been ignoring the nuance of your identity. And this was just for bureaucratic paperwork reasons that the state and federal government had.
Yes, and this is a part of the whole colonial geographic understandings. It is a complicated question, and a lot was lost, and the boundaries are not hard. I remember, I think it was Greg, someone asked that question. They're not hard boundaries. The best information that you can get are from the people of those tribes, from the native people, from the local native people.
My understanding is that from the area of Clear Lake all the way to the coast, there are people who identify as Pomo, although on the map there are many other names and then subnames within the map. And then the same thing with Machupta, right? It's like I wonder, like when you ask like what do you wonder about, it's one of the things that I wonder about as an older student, and I'm sure as a younger student, students would wonder about it. And I think that, as you said, it's an anthropological and thus colonial determination. And so it's an interesting thing to ponder, like, who am I? What am I called?
Mhm.
And what do I identify as?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, it's a really great point. It's a super interesting conversation to have with students. I think it applies to lots of people, also not just Native American people. It applies to people who have been impacted by colonialism or imperialism. We are often just given names that are not our ancestral names. My tribe, our political name is Maidu, but and people identify as Maidu, but our full name would be Time Maidu. Right. And then we have specific villages within that we would identify by. So it is very complicated.
Yep. Let's see, Australia.
How can we support Redbud financially? Well, we have donation page on our website, redbudresourcegroup.org. Maybe Rose, you could put a link in there. We have periodically raffles where we will feature a local Native artist or jewelry maker, and then we'll sell raffle tickets. So that's also a fun way to be able to support us and maybe get something fun out of it. You can also sign up for our newsletter as well and share our information. We are a team of 4 Native women. Okay, let's see. So developing, adapting, creating, what are some key things to keep in mind from wanting to do it respectfully? So the best way to teach Native perspective, Native studies, is for it to actually be from a Native person. I know this is not always possible, but I'm just going to tell you that is the best way for students to get this information, is to have it come from the mouth of a Native person who is well vetted, who is well respected by their own community and is accepted by their own community. This is really, really important. So there are Native-led institutions, like there's Redbud, there's museums in your region, there's most likely cultural centers, but there's probably Native resources, teaching resources in your community. It is really important to build relationships with those people and communities. That takes a lot of time and emotional energy, but that's the right way to do this. So for some Native people, the idea of teaching any traditional ecological knowledge to non-Native people, it shouldn't be allowed. So that's another thing, is that you're going to see there is going to be some pushback, right? Different people are going to believe different things. And so getting as close to the source as possible. I think that having materials that are made by tribes and are vetted and approved by tribes is great. The National Museum of American Indian is a really good resource because they work in partnership with tribal governments to create their curriculum. And so, anything that's coming out of there is going to be approved. Our stuff is also approved. And so just ask yourself what source, to go back to the Jamboard, right? What is the source of your material? And if you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the relationships yet, focus on building them. Don't worry about rushing into something that you're not going to do well or do right, because that can have damage. I also think that picking books by Native people is a quick way to integrate Indigenous, perspectives in the classroom. So any of the books that we shared with you today, there's lots of Native novels, there's Native made TV shows and media that you can share. I loved Attending the Wild documentary series by KCET. It's a very high quality science documentary series on Native culture and knowledge. So you just want to make sure that you vet the quality of your source before just making something up out of the blue based off what you read.
Stop teaching Island of the Dolphins. It's not a Native created source.
Yeah. Any other questions, ways that we can help you? We're going to stay on a little bit just in case anybody wants to ask us something, but I do know that it's 11:30, so it's been 90 minutes and some people need to go and start planning for your classes. So I hope you can take something from this. Please try to integrate Native geography into the beginning of your class. I know that in the beginning of school year, we're often reviewing how to read maps and how to read geography. Don't forget about us when you do it.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been such a pleasure.
Rose, can you maybe put a link to the website? Let's see. Thanks.
Yes, there's a link in the chat of our
Recording
website.
in progress.
Wow.
Thank you again to everybody who could make it here today. For those who are still on, just want to remind that we have another great event going on tomorrow evening on Indigenous data sovereignty.